What would you say is the best launch game of all time? Every system to be released has some major notable standout titles that define the consoles they were released for. But what about the somewhat smaller titles of a system's launch? They have arguably just as big of an impact as the major games. One smaller launch game with a huge impact comes from the original PlayStation release of Rayman. Now, Rayman wasn't necessarily a smaller title success-wise. The title sold around 4 million units after all. But it's not one of the first titles I feel a lot of people mention when discussing the PS1. But it was a system-selling launch title on hardware that mainly focused on 3D games. Its success managed to put Ubisoft on the map as a legitimate major developer, and solidified the careers of some of the biggest names in European game development, despite the longer development cycle. Today, I want to take a deep dive into the first game's development in the beloved Rayman series. Be sure to subscribe here at the Glowsider channel, and let me know in the comments what game history tidbits you would like me to cover next. Alright, let's take a dive into the 1980s, in the Western European microstate, Monaco. One of the most important names in this story is Michel Ancel. Born in Monaco, he began his journey into video games after visiting an open day as a result of his father's work in the army. After playing one of the showcased unnamed titles, Michel was hooked, spending his entire afternoon playing this small, lost platformer title developed by a military member. He began truly understanding the concept of being a game developer as a result of his interactions with the creator of this small project, and would experiment with his family's ColecoVision, quickly turning off and on the console to reset the game without fully erasing the memory, resulting in new feeling layouts being created for his games. He would become even more enamored with a friend's Atari 2600 in the early 1980s. After moving to Montpellier, France alongside his family in the mid-1980s, Michel got to be fully engrossed in the world of video games, playing games in arcades, on newer console hardware, and getting to experience the PC game scene drew Michel further into this fascination, leading him to learn programming languages for the current 8-bit PCs, such as the Atari 800. Eventually, he would be upgraded to an Atari ST 16-bit machine. This was a higher-end PC around 1987, and could reproduce graphics similar to the type of quality found in arcades. This ignited the artist and programmer within Michel, who took advantage of the machine to create some of his own software. One of the first known titles from Michel is an unreleased project titled Mechanic Warriors. This was a joint project with another programmer, Nicolas Choucron. Mechanic Warriors was an action strategy title, utilizing various shooter mechanics. Gameplay revolved around piloting various machines, such as tankers, transporters, or fighters, and completing various tasks within a stage. When a battle had been won, you were able to take pieces from the defeated enemy, and build new robot units to help you fight. The game would be brought to the French publisher Lancour, as Nicolas had worked with the company before on a previous title known as Killdozers. However, the publisher had a bigger focus on the title Wapiti Island, which was diverting all their attention and financial backing. With Mechanic Warriors being as ambitious as it was, the game was ultimately scrapped, and would be reworked into a much more simple shoot-'em-up title named Intruder in 1989. This project wound up being beneficial for Michel, however, as it taught him a valuable skill going forward, animating characters made through various independent sprites. After the unfortunate cancellation of Mechanic Warriors, Michel wasn't ready to give up. Seeking more game work, he decided to go ahead and send some demonstrations of his work to a small French publisher, going by the name of Ubisoft. In 1986, the Guillemot brothers had been running a mail-order sales business for computers for about 2 years now. They had decided to move into the software market as well, releasing titles such as the original Zombie. Ubisoft, by this point, was a smaller publisher, with Zombie selling around 5,000 units. It would be quite a while before they grew into the software giant we know them as now. After Michel sent over some examples of his work, he and Nicolas would put together that simple shoot-'em-up, Intruder, as their first title with Ubisoft. This would then lead into the duo continuing to partner on the title Pick and Pile, a puzzle game centered around matching various symbols to clear the current board. This title would later receive an Atari 2600 release by one Dennis M. Kiss, becoming the only title ever released on the platform by Ubisoft. The Teller would become Michel's next title, and this would be a big one for the fledgling developer, as this became his first major title created by himself. This would be yet another puzzle game with the main focus being on memorization. The goal would be to memorize various patterns of blocks and then recreate them. It may have been a more simple title, but it helped put Michel on yet another important road. Now, around a year after finishing up The Teller, Michel would be brought in as an employee at Ubisoft, working as a graphic designer. However, he wasn't very satisfied working solely in this position. During this period of apathy, he would reconnect with an old high school programming friend by the name of Frederic Wade. Growing up as a programmer for the Amiga, Frederic began working at Ubisoft on a game titled Zodiac for the Sega Genesis or Mega Drive, depending on your region. As the two discussed their life at Ubisoft, Michel decided to show a small character he had been working on. It was a character with big googly eyes and a rather large nose. His limbs simply didn't exist, and instead had his hands and feet floating next to him. With spiky hair and a circle on his chest, this character would be called Rayman. With a name derived from the term ray tracing, Rayman's initial design work would pull a lot from the limitations of 3D animation during the era. His hands and legs being separated from his body mainly came as a result of early 3D animation's difficulty. However, the design was charming, and Michel, who recently left Ubisoft, working alongside Frederic, began work on Rayman purely freelance back in Montpellier. In 1993, the Super Nintendo was one of the biggest consoles in the European market, and with the anticipation of the surefire success SNES CD add-on, the team of two began work for their new title on the system. They would put together a prototype that would be showcased to Ubisoft to pitch their new project alongside a full game design bible, featuring the story, characters, gameplay mechanics, and more. The bible would be worked on together by Michel after leaving Ubisoft, and Frederic after finishing military service, with the two traveling to meet each other to continue work on this pitch bible. Rayman's origin within this pitch was wildly different from what would ultimately be released. In this version, Rayman is actually a young human boy named Jim. After his over-the-top uncle named Hendrix is sucked into a computer, Jim is forced to enter the computer himself in an attempt to rescue him. As he enters the digital world, he turns into a digital hero named Rayman. As you go through the different stages, the different parts of the computer would have different worlds themed around them, such as the graphics card having a world based heavily around art. The goal would be to fight a computer virus that was slowly taking control of and wiping this PC of its creative worlds. Throughout this adventure, he would receive various power-ups such as fist upgrades and a magic paintbrush. The Rayman Bible would be an extremely fleshed out concept, full of different ideas pushing both art and design to its absolute limits for the target hardware. While this pitch prototype would, unsurprisingly, be somewhat barren, there wound up being a compelling enough amount of content to quickly justify the game's production. Sporting a more rotund, simple design, this Rayman would squish when jumping into ceilings, and almost feel like jelly. The prototype would also feature a glimpse into the full title's level design. It would also attempt to give this early Rayman some extra personality, with unique idle animations and a more powerful looking charge punch. With this pitch, the two-person team would be brought into Ubisoft under the new Ubi Pictures studio, with Michel working on art and the design of the world, as well as Frederic developing the game engine and further programming as the solo technical head leading the team. This made hiring for the project much easier for the duo. Alexandra Stiebel was an experienced television animator who would be brought on the project to help create this living animated world after responding to a newspaper ad. Alongside Alexandra, Jacques Exercier would also join the team as another experienced television animator. Composition for the title became one of the most important aspects of building this living, breathing world. Almost the entire title soundtrack would be composed by Remy Gazelle. This would easily become one of the most iconic parts of the original game. The next new member of the team would be Olivier Soleil. Working primarily as a computer animator, Soleil had experience in the technical animation scene, creating various demos to demonstrate new technological advancements in the medium. Soleil would contribute the various pieces of pixel art to the first game, alongside a variety of 3D assets. Jean-Christophe Alessandri would also join the project as a 3D artist, helping to contribute a variety of different background elements on the project. With a still relatively smaller team, development on the first Rayman title officially began. One of the first orders of business would be the target platform for development. It became very clear that the SNES CD wouldn't see the light of day, and the team wanted to create a truly ambitious and eye-catching 2D title that just wouldn't be possible on the aging SNES or Genesis hardware, both of which were steadily on the way out the door by 1994. Not wanting to develop their new, exciting title for a doomed console, the team made the decision to move their game to an exciting newcomer in the console scene, the Atari Jaguar. At the time, developing the game for the Jaguar made a lot of sense, as it would be one of the more powerful consoles on the market, with hardware somewhat reminiscent to the Mega Drive, which Frederic already had experience with. And Atari was still a recognizable brand that would seemingly be able to bring in a noteworthy attachment rate. With the development platform set, work began on fleshing out the characters and world. Alexandra began working with Michel on a more fleshed out Rayman design, clearly taking inspiration from Alexandra's history within animation. They were also able to start hand-drawing Rayman's various animations for the game, as utilizing the newest digitization methods meant they were able to accurately translate 2D animation work into fully fleshed out sprites. During this phase, Rayman's story and characters would shift away from the digital world concept, and instead focus on a more magical world of fairies and monsters. One of the benefits of this shift was the gorgeous, lush environments that added to the animated feel and storybook vibe of the finished game. These environments would be headed by Eric Palatin, working off the original concept sketches with some environment pitches by Michel. These environments would take on a whole new animated life of their own, fitting in beautifully with the gorgeous 2D animation and telling a story of their own within each stage. The first ever public reveal of Rayman came in Chicago, Illinois, in 1994 during the Consumer Electronics Show. CES was the big event for showcasing new games at the time, and Rayman managed to wow this audience of reviewers and reporters. Showcased at the Atari booth as a major example of the Jaguar's power, the title's 2D animation pushed the boundaries of game sprites during this era. Excitement for the title grew internally at Ubisoft, with various pieces of promotional material being created and passed around internally. This excitement would lead to the higher-ups at Ubisoft deciding to port the title to platforms beyond just the Atari Jaguar, likely unintentionally saving the title from total obscurity. The original Montpellier team continued development on this Atari Jaguar version, while new teams would be formed within Paris to begin porting the title elsewhere. At the January 1995 Winter CES, Ubisoft announced Rayman to also be coming to the Sega Saturn, Sega 32X, the 3DO, and arguably the most important port, the Sony PlayStation. This would be a major, unforeseen benefit for the title, as it would now wind up being a launch title for the PS1 in multiple regions, giving Day One owners a major incentive to pick up this small, unknown title thanks to the relatively smaller library. With the PS1 becoming a major hit, eyes would be on Rayman as it was one of the standout games for the platform. While preparing to release the title, various pieces of advertisement would begin circulation in major publications, initially only really promoting the Jaguar version. In some early promotion, the original digital story concept would still be used, now also titling Rayman's world as Here It's Cool. Luckily, this name would finally be swapped out for the finalized world we would see in-game. Rayman's initial release would actually come first to the PlayStation 1, beating out the Jaguar version by a few days or weeks depending on who you ask, as there's no solid documentation that I could find regarding exactly when the Jaguar version released. other than it arriving after the PS1 version. While development was primarily focused on the Jaguar version, the other versions would quickly outpace the Jaguar release, becoming a staple title in most PS1 owners' collections during the PS1 launch period and beyond. With the Saturn version releasing in November of that year, and a DOS version in 1996, Rayman's home was primarily found on the PlayStation and Saturn, with the PC version being a success in its own right, with fan-made levels and official level packs, as well as a level builder developed for the platform. The game would quickly gain positive reviews across the board from multiple major review outlets, and become one of the best-selling games on almost all of the platforms it released for, gaining major notable sales notoriety on the PS1, as it is still one of the top-sold games for the platform. The success of Rayman gave Ubisoft the push it needed to become a major games publisher on the worldwide stage. Without Rayman, Ubisoft wouldn't have become the publisher it is today, and the series would spend a long time as the staple franchise of Ubisoft. With success this massive for a new title, a sequel was quickly greenlit. And while initial development began as a 2D sequel to the original Rayman, Rayman 2 would eventually release as a fully 3D title, further pushing the boundaries of the platformer genre. Rayman would become one of the most important titles for Ubisoft in their entire library, kickstarting the careers of multiple creatives and showcasing the power of the then next-gen hardware. While Ubisoft certainly reaped in the benefits from the title, Sony also benefited from the title's release as well. Rayman became a standout title in the limited PS1 launch lineup, and it helped to showcase the power and appeal of Sony's new console in a crowded console space. It also helped show consumers that, although this new era of 3D titles was exciting and revolutionary, 2D games still had a massive appeal on consoles going forward. And despite Sony's own insistence that 2D was old news, the PS1 could still deliver great 2D titles. Rayman would help set both Ubisoft and Sony on the path of success in the upcoming modern game scene, and would become one of the best launch games ever made.